There may be a parasite riding under the plates of the bee in your garden right now. Not on the flower, not beside her, on her, pressed into the narrow space between the hard segments of her body, flat and reddish-brown, smaller than a pinhead, holding on while she works the flower as if nothing is wrong. She still moves. She still lowers her head into the bloom. She still lifts off and returns to the hive with whatever she managed to collect. But if the mite is there, the damage may have started before she ever saw sunlight. That is what makes this different from the predators we notice. A hornet is obvious. A spider web is visible. A bird taking an insect from the air looks like a death. This does not. This looks like an ordinary bee visiting an ordinary garden on an ordinary morning, while the thing that may destroy her colony is small enough to miss unless you are looking for it. The killer is called Varroa destructor. If you have ever wondered why people keep saying the bees are disappearing, this is one of the reasons. Not the only reason, not the whole story, but one of the quietest and most destructive pressures on honeybees, garden bees, and the pollinators that keep places like yours alive. The name sounds dramatic until you learn what it does. It does not need to chase bees across your garden. It does not need to sting them. It does not need to be larger or stronger or faster. It enters the place where a bee is being made, hides while the cell is sealed, feeds on the developing body inside, reproduces in the dark, and sends the adult bee into the world already damaged. By the time you see her on your flowers, part of the story may already be over. If that changes how you look at the bee in your garden, subscribe. New video every week. Stay until the end, because the strangest part is not that the mite is killing bees. It is that for decades, even scientists were partly wrong about how it was doing it. Most people imagine a bee's enemies as things large enough to fear. A bear tearing open a hive, a hornet waiting at the entrance, a human spraying flowers without thinking. These threats make sense to us because they match the size of the damage. Big harm should come from something big. Varroa breaks that instinct. A mature female mite is tiny, but on the body of a bee, she is not tiny in proportion. She is more like a dinner plate pressed against your ribs. If you saw a parasite that size attached to a person, you would not need anyone to explain that something was wrong. But on a bee, hidden between body segments or moving inside the hive, the mite can vanish into the background. That invisibility is part of the horror. The bee in your garden may look whole, her wings may still beat, her legs may still gather pollen. She may still return to the hive and pass through the entrance like every other worker. But the colony is not only fighting what you can see from the outside. It is fighting a honeybee parasite that lives inside the timing of bee development. To understand why that matters, you have to go into the brood cell. A worker bee begins as an egg laid into a wax cell. She hatches into a larva, is fed by nurse bees, grows quickly, and then her cell is capped. From the outside, the capped cell looks quiet, a small wax lid, a sealed chamber. Inside, the larva transforms into a pupa and then into an adult bee. This is supposed to be one of the protected spaces of the hive. For Varroa, it is a nursery. A female mite slips into the cell shortly before it is sealed. She hides in the larval food at the bottom, submerged enough to avoid immediate detection. Then the workers cap the cell, believing they have sealed a developing bee safely inside. They have also sealed the parasite in with her. Now the mite begins. Inside that closed wax room, the foundress mite feeds on the developing bee and lays eggs of her own. Her offspring mature while the bee is still forming. The timing is precise. The parasite's life cycle is synchronized with the bee's life cycle. When the young bee finally chews her way out of the cell, the mother mite and any mature daughters can leave with her and spread through the colony. Imagine a threat that does not attack the adult army. It enters the nursery and rides out on the children. That is why this parasite is so damaging. It is not just taking from individual bees, it is using the colony's own reproduction system as a place to reproduce itself. Every new bee is a possible vehicle. Every sealed cell is a possible hiding place. Every healthy-looking worker emerging from the comb may be carrying more than her own body into the hive. And then some of those workers fly into gardens like yours. If this is the kind of hidden bee behavior most people never get to see, stay with me. Because once you understand what happens inside this sealed cell, the bee on your flower stops looking like a simple visitor. She starts looking like the survivor of a fight that began before she could fly. This is the part that matters for the person standing outside, watching a bee on a flower. The garden is not where the main attack happens. Your lavender is not where the mite reproduces. The true damage happens in the hive, in darkness, inside sealed wax cells and under adult body plates. But the bee you see is connected to that hidden world. She is the visible surface of it. The forager on your flowers may be healthy. She may not be carrying anything. Many bees you see are simply doing what bees have done for millions of years, finding food, returning with value, keeping the colony alive. But the reason Varroa is so dangerous is that it makes ordinary bees carry an extraordinary problem. A parasitized bee may have a shorter life. She may weigh less. She may have weaker immunity. She may be more vulnerable to viruses. She may perform poorly before any human notices. And in severe cases, the signs become visible enough that even someone with no training can recognize something has gone wrong. Bees with shortened abdomens, trembling bodies, or wings that never developed properly. That last sign has a name many people have heard without understanding what caused it. Deformed Wing Virus. The virus can exist in bees without the obvious twisted wings people associate with it. But Varroa changes the whole disease landscape. The mite does not only wound the bee by feeding, it can move viruses through the colony in a way that makes infection more intense, more direct, and more damaging. The parasite becomes a needle moving from body to body. This is why the old explanation was not enough. For a long time, people often described Varroa as feeding on bee hemolymph, the insect fluid people sometimes compare to blood. That sounded bad enough, a tiny mite drinking from bees, weakening them, carrying viruses. But newer research showed that the story was even stranger. Varroa feeds primarily on the honeybee's fat body tissue. That phrase does not sound dramatic until you understand what the fat body does. In insects, the fat body is not just stored fat. It is involved in energy storage, detoxification, immune function, hormone regulation, and the production of important proteins. A rough human comparison would be something like liver, fat, and immune-related tissue rolled into one distributed organ. It is one of the systems that helps a bee survive stress. So Varroa is not simply stealing fluid, it is damaging an organ system the bee needs to live. That changes the way the parasite looks in your mind. It is not a tick taking a drink and leaving the host slightly weaker. It is a small animal externally digesting tissue that the bee depends on for survival. It is taking from the bee's capacity to resist illness, process stress, store energy, and make it through the demands of her role. Now bring that back to the bee in your garden. The bee on your flower is not just flying. She is burning energy at a rate that would be impossible without the systems inside her body working correctly. She has to navigate, regulate heat, process sensory information, carry nectar or pollen, and return to the hive. Her body is already built around extreme efficiency because her adult life is short. There is not much margin. Varroa attacks the margin. This is why a healthy-looking pollinator garden can still be connected to a struggling hive. The flowers may be doing their part. The bees may still be arriving. But inside the colony, the real question is whether enough honeybees are surviving long enough to keep the system moving. A healthy worker has only a few weeks in summer. A sick worker has less. A worker weakened before she emerges may never become the forager she was supposed to be. If enough workers are weakened at once, the colony loses the ability to replace itself properly, defend itself properly, and prepare for winter. This is why the mite does not need to kill every bee directly. it can tilt the whole colony. A hive survives through timing. Young bees nurse larvae. Older bees clean, guard, and forage. Winter bees must live longer than summer foragers because they carry the colony through cold months when new brood may be limited. If Varroa and the viruses it spreads shorten the lives of those bees, the collapse can appear later than the damage that caused it. From the outside, people often notice the ending. Fewer bees, a weak hive, dead bees near the entrance, a colony that seemed fine and then was not. But inside the hive, the arithmetic may have been changing for months. Each mite, each infected pupa, each weakened worker, each winter bee that cannot live long enough. The colony does not fail in one dramatic moment. It loses the future slowly, and then all at once. That is the part that makes Varroa so different from the dangers we like to film. There is no single battle scene, no thermal ball around a hornet, no swarm rising from a branch, no queen cell opening in a dramatic moment. There's just a small brown mite moving through a world of wax and bodies, turning the colony's own life cycle into a corridor for damage. And the bee in your garden is the proof that the colony is still trying. Even with parasites, viruses, poor forage, weather shifts, pesticides, and all the pressure humans have added to the landscape, she is still there, on the flower, working. Because the colony cannot stop for danger it has not finished solving. Nectar still has to be collected. Larvae still have to be fed. The queen still has to lay. The hive still has to turn flowers into time. Right now, while you are watching this, somewhere within flying distance of gardens like yours, bees are dealing with this at the scale of the cell. Nurse bees move over the comb. Some detect trouble. Some uncap cells. Some remove infected or damaged brood. Some colonies are better at this than others. Some bees groom themselves or each other and knock mites loose. Some lines of honeybee have stronger hygienic behavior. In the original host relationship, Asian honeybees and Varroa have a longer coevolutionary history, and the balance is different. But for Western honeybees, the relationship became devastating after the mite shifted hosts and spread. That is what makes this feel less like a simple villain story. Varroa is not evil. It is successful. Too successful for the host system it entered. It found a way to live inside the reproductive rhythm of bees, and the bees are still being forced to answer it. Every bee species has enemies. Every colony has pressures. But this one is especially cruel because it hides where the colony is most vulnerable, inside the making of the next generation. The garden hides the damage from us because the garden shows the bee at her most normal. She lands, she works, she lifts off. She looks like evidence that everything is fine, and sometimes it is. But the truth is that the flower is only one frame in a much longer film. Before that bee reached your garden, she passed through an egg, a larva, a capped cell, a sealed chamber, an emergence, a period of work inside the hive, and finally the dangerous promotion to outside flight. Varroa can enter that story before the first flight, before the first flower, before the bee has ever seen the sky. This is why the title matters. The bee killer in your garden is smaller than a pinhead, but it is not really a garden creature. It is a hive creature whose effects show up in the garden. It is hidden in the colony that sends bees to your flowers. It rides on the bodies of insects you may only notice for 2 seconds before they move on. You could stand beside the flower all morning and never see it. That does not mean it is not there. And yet, this should not make you look at every bee as doomed. That would be the wrong lesson. Bees are not delicate ornaments waiting to disappear. They are resilient animals from resilient colonies with defenses, behaviors, and histories of survival. Some colonies fight back better than others. Some workers are better at detecting and removing infected brood. Some bees groom mites from their bodies. Some survive because the colony catches the damage early enough. The story is not finished, but pretending the threat is small because the mite is small is the mistake. Scale is the trick. The mite is tiny compared to your hand, huge compared to a bee, catastrophic compared to a developing pupa sealed in a wax cell with nowhere to go. When I think about the bee on a flower now, I think less about the single insect and more about the invisible chain behind her, the hive she came from, the cell she emerged from, the workers who cleaned it before the queen laid the egg, the cap that sealed her in, the darkness where she formed, the possibility that another life form may have been sealed in there with her. Then I think about how calmly she works. She does not know the name Varroa destructor. She does not know about fat body tissue, viral load, host shifts, or the way humans argue about why bees are dying. She only knows the immediate world available to her: scent, light, sugar, wind, distance, the direction home. She does the job in front of her with a body that may already carry the cost of a battle she never saw. That is the part that stays with me. The bee is not heroic because she understands the threat. She is heroic because she keeps flying inside a world full of threats she cannot understand. A few weeks ago, you may have looked at a bee and thought only about whether she might sting. Then you learn how rarely that choice is worth her life. You look again, and she becomes less frightening. Then you learn how much work is hidden in a teaspoon of honey. You look again, and she becomes more costly. Then you learn that the queen is not really in charge, that scouts vote without her, that tiny brains solve roots, that the hive is less like a kingdom and more like a living calculation. And then there is this. A parasite smaller than a pinhead can enter that whole system and make the future heavier. It can shorten the life of the worker that would have visited your flowers tomorrow. It can damage the bee that should have nursed larvae next week. It can carry a virus into a developing body before the wings are finished. It can make a colony that looks busy in summer fail before spring. That is why seeing a bee in your garden should not feel ordinary. She is the survivor of a long sequence of things that had to go right. The queen had to lay the egg, workers had to feed the larva, the cell had to be capped, the developing bee had to emerge, she had to grow into her role, she had to avoid predators, weather, exhaustion, and the invisible parasites of the hive. Then she had to find your flowers and make the flight worth it. By the time she lands in front of you, she is not just a bee, she is evidence that the colony is still holding. And maybe that is the best way to see her. Not as a symbol of collapse, and not as a simple victim, but as the visible edge of a fight happening mostly out of sight. She is the part you are allowed to witness. The rest is under wax lids, between body plates, in the immune systems of insects, in the work of colonies that detect what is wrong, and in the quiet choices people make about the spaces where pollinators have to forage. The mite is smaller than a pinhead. The system it threatens is enormous. The bee in your garden is where those two scales meet. So the next time one lands on a flower near you, do not only watch the flower, watch the body. Watch how much is being asked of it. Watch how small she is, and how much smaller the thing that threatens her can be. Then remember that most of the important things happening in a hive are happening below the threshold of human attention. The killer is small enough to miss. The fight is large enough to shape the future of the colony. Have you ever seen a bee with damaged or twisted wings, or a bee crawling near flowers instead of flying normally? At the time, did you know what you might be looking at? Tell me what you noticed. I read every single comment, especially the ones where someone realizes the warning signs were in the garden all along. Subscribe for the next one. And the next time a healthy bee lifts off from your flowers, remember this. She may look fragile, but she is also proof that her colony has not stopped fighting.